Hello and welcome to the Bond Revisited podcast with me, Tom.
And me, Joe.
The podcast where we rewatch the Bond films one by one, discuss them, and then rank them alongside the other Bond films to build our own definitive list for the Bond franchise. You are listening to a bonus episode where we'll be revisiting the third episode of the TV show Climax, Casino Royale. So it's only been a few months, Joe, that we sat down together and I started off a podcast episode saying, there's this really obscure version of Casino Royale that nobody talks about. Somebody should really talk about it. And now we're back, and I feel like I could just say the exact same things all over again.
I think we should. I mean, did we say in the last episode about barrel bottoms being scraped? We possibly could have.
Yeah, that sounds about right, yeah.
Well, we're scraping even further. We're really getting to the muck now. Like,
there was more to find.
It's just a whole other layer here. Oh, great.
Yeah, so I guess for a little context, we were kind of talking about, hey, you know, is there anything else we would want to cover? And then, of course, when you start looking into Bond stuff, there is quite a lot of stuff out there. And we came across, and I think it's something we both already knew, but I'd kind of forgotten about, the fact that back in the 50s, there was an adaptation of Casino Royale that was exclusive to the TV show Climax. And after spending all that time talking about the Casino Royale 1967, how obscure it is, like, this is another layer below that. But to me, that kind of makes it interesting, like, kind of worthwhile checking out. So that's what we're going to do today.
We are. I think in terms of Bond fandom, you know, you have your tiers of knowledge, your pub quiz knowledge, right? And you start off with, you know, you've got the Bond films, the official Eon productions. Then we've got Never Say Never Again, that weird one, but it still had Sean Connery. Then you've got the 1967 Casino Royale, you know, not official, but still a big film, lots of Hollywood stars. And then we get to this one. This is for people that really, you know, want to know their stuff. And it's like, oh, well, actually, the first Bond was an American guy on this TV show. And then you've lost all interest with the people you're talking to by this point. They're out. It's just...
Oh yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, you, as you kind of say, there's different tiers, and there is not as much interest in Casino Royale, the 1967 film, but I have seen like no interest in this version of it, even though it was like the first, even though it is a bit of history, you know, even though it came out like a year after the book did, and Ian Fleming, I'm not sure if he was involved, but he was still alive, and it was the first adaptation of the character. But even despite all of that, I just see nothing about it. And I'm not saying nobody's covered it. I'm sure people have, absolutely. But if the Casino Royale 1967 sometimes gets ignored, this is like... I guess the thing I would say is that you are more likely to hear a Bond podcast talk about Austin Powers than they are about this Bond adaptation, which was the very first one and is like quite important in some ways. People are more likely to talk about Mike Myers and that stuff rather than this.
Yeah, baby. Although maybe
No.
maybe that's maybe that's for a good reason, as we shall go into.
Maybe, but like, I guess I've heard so little about it that I haven't heard it's bad. Like, it's not like people don't talk about saying, oh, forget that one because it's terrible. So in terms of what the quality is like and what it's all about, I mean, I got no idea.
I guess it's just so old. I mean, actually, I don't know
Yeah.
when we're going to be releasing this episode, but it will be close to the 70th anniversary of it, which is kind of crazy.
Oh yeah, I guess it will.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could sync that up, make that happen.
Yeah. Hooray, happy birthday, Climax 1954, Barry
Yeah.
Nelson.
So how much do you know about Climax, the TV show?
I knew absolutely nothing before recording this. I quickly looked it up and found it was some sort of kind of reminded me a bit of Twilight Zone, where it was like a very, I don't know the right word, but you know, each episode is just a self-contained story, and it's just it seemed like a bit of schlocky TV. I don't know if that's fair, but you don't really hear much about it, basically. So I figured it was probably quite forgettable in its time.
Yeah, I guess it must have been. My understanding of Climax, so I'm very much in the same boat. Never heard of this show. I don't think anyone really has. But because it's got this Casino Royale adaptation in there, that's probably the most notable thing about it. From what I've read, a lot of the show has just been lost to time. As you say, each episode is kind of its own individual thing. It was a TV show that ran for a few years in the 50s. Apparently, it was broadcast in color, but all of the versions that exist nowadays of episodes are in black and white. So you can only watch it in black and white. But apparently, it did originally broadcast in color. And it's just become forgotten media for the most part. I couldn't find any evidence of a proper re-release. There's nowhere to really watch this show, especially for the fact that it ran for 4 years and had a ton of episodes. Instead, there's just individual episodes that you can watch, like some on YouTube. There's some like DVDs that just have like random episodes of this TV show. And then, of course, there's Casino Royale, which was included on the Casino Royale 1967 Blu-ray and DVD as an extra, which is how I was able to watch it for this.
See, Tom's a true fan. He's got the DVD, he's got the Blu-ray, he's got the bonus features. I watched it on YouTube. So, because it's, very much out of copyright now, so there's tons of versions of it online. So I just watched it there.
Yes, so we have potentially seen two different versions of this, and there is some like conversations about missing endings and credits and stuff because this is lost media, because it's this forgotten TV show. It doesn't have this nice clean history and story around it. It's just, yeah, an American TV production company just made a show, and I think they did episodes about like Huckleberry Finn got an episode. Like they just took random stories and just did it each week, and there you go. That's an episode done. Boom. And I think you kind of mentioned before, there's like nothing that really connects them as far as I can tell. It's just a TV show showing stories. So one week it's Casino Royale, another week it's just this, maybe it's a unique story, and then another week it's a completely different adaptation. And it's, I guess it kind of speaks to how TV was back then. Just like,
Yeah.
we need stories and shows, so just do that. And that's all you needed.
This TV thing's kicking off. We
Yeah.
need stuff. I did read one of the other stories was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as well. So again, they probably just looked at all these novels from, I don't know actually whether it would have been out of like copyright back then, but very much easy to adapt. And I even saw that apparently some of them were made. I don't know if they were broadcast live. I don't know if they would have had the technology to do that then, but I guess maybe filmed as if they were live. So it's just like a one take thing. Get it on, cut, ship it.
Yeah, like I think they did that. Again, there's just not enough information about this show. But I guess the interesting part isn't necessarily the show itself, but that is the history of Climax and what it is. So the people behind the TV show went and just paid Ian Fleming some money, saying like, we want to do Casino Royale. So they paid him money to do that. And then they just did it. And then I think that was that. Like nothing else really happened. Nothing else kind of came of it. I believe, just from what I've read, this adaptation did somewhat relate to some of the stories that Ian Fleming wrote about Bond. That there was a deal that he got with CBS, who made Climax, and then he started writing like stories for them, but that never really panned out. So a lot of those stories then just got released separately, which is where some of these more shorter stories of Bond came from in later years. So I guess you could thank it for that, but that's probably the biggest impact it ever had on the franchise, because afterwards everyone just forgot and kind of moved on.
Yeah. And I suppose it is interesting, or it's important to note that, as Tom said, this was a year after the book was published. Ian Fleming just wanted some money. Don't blame him. And so, James Bond wasn't a thing then. Like it was barely. I don't think James Bond really got that popular until like the early 60s, right? When something to do with JFK saying that From Russia with Love was his favorite book. So, we're looking at this now with the viewpoint of big Bond fans, everything that's come afterwards, but it's going to be really, just important to kind of keep in mind the time frame of this, because we're going to make so many comparisons, aren't we? It's just inevitable. But this was just a one thing, and get on with the rest. I pump out the rest of them. So yeah, a little oddity for sure in the Bond history.
Yeah, like this wasn't even the first episode of the show. This was the third one, which is still quite early on. But I think that kind of shows Like if you had this type of TV show, you wouldn't save James Bond like for the third one. But yeah, as
Mm.
you kind of say, at the time it was more of a story. Uh, yeah, again, I'm not exactly sure when the books got really popular. My understanding is that they were quite popular when Doctor No came out, which is why some of the advertising for that film was like the first James Bond film, come and get it. But yeah, I don't even know if Live and Let Die had come out yet around this time. But yeah, this was only a year after the book, so there was only so much success the series would have had by this point.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we get into it?
Let's.
Yeah. So for me, it kicked off with a black and white MGM lion logo. I don't know
Oh,
if your
okay.
version had that or not.
No. In fact, I'm going to be honest, and this is sort of embarrassing, but the version I watched on YouTube had a big time code in the corner, which covered a bit, and also a thing that says "not for broadcast" in the top corner. So
Oh.
can't say I watched the best version, but it was okay. It got the job done.
Okay. I mean, it makes sense that it wouldn't because MGM. So for me, I was watching on the Blu-ray, and MGM got the rights to this episode, I believe, alongside when they got the rights to Casino Royale, and like all the Casino Royale stuff just got merged together, and then they got it off Sony, and well, we all know the story. Well, it's probably too complicated to know all the details, but we know it was messy. So it looks like for the Blu-ray version, they were just like, well, we own it. They didn't make it. They had nothing to do with this, but we own it. So for my version, yeah, you get the MGM lion logo, and they've just made it black and white, so it fits in with the rest of the episode.
It is interesting that even they don't have the color version, and that's just been completely lost to time. Because I
Yeah,
think that would have really helped. It wouldn't have necessarily helped the quality of it, but I think it would have just made it feel less old. So yeah,
yeah, I think it would have helped a ton as well. Like the quality of the episode on the Blu-ray, I wouldn't say is terrible from when it was from, but it did feel like it wasn't a clean version of it. Nothing like
mm,
that. So you could kind of tell this was not like a perfect version. Not enough to really put me off it, but you could kind of tell, yeah, this is not like they didn't get the archives for this and then just convert that to Blu-ray. It felt like it was a little bit, yeah, bit not blurry, but you know what I mean. There was stuff on
yeah,
top of it. So we kick off with it's a camera, right? Like a movie camera.
yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of hear someone like an announcer saying like live from Television City in Hollywood. Very much that voice. And like the camera, this is gonna be hard to explain. The camera like goes into the camera that you can see.
Yeah.
Then you're like going through like a tube inside the camera, basically, and the announcer is reading out the names of all the people in it, like Barry Nelson. Uh, and it's a very much like a, I guess, production TV show sort of thing where it's just someone just announcing the show, and that all leads to him being like, "It's Climax, the TV show."
It's really interesting. It's I do wonder because obviously this came before anything else in terms of like visually. So and it does look like a gun barrel in a way. And it's got the
Yeah,
aperture. That's kind of what the gun barrel is. It looks like the aperture of a camera. And as I was watching it, I was like, "Oh, okay, I was not expecting this."
yeah, it felt strangely appropriate because there's not a lot of Climax out there, but I think, this was kind of the theme of the show where it's like, come and check out the latest from Hollywood. We're just doing stuff. So the camera is to tie into that. But I totally agree. For some reason, coincidentally, it seems like it does have that gun barrel, like you're inside of a gun barrel, but it's not a gun barrel, it's a camera. But as you say, it does look quite close to it.
Yeah. I wonder if I don't know, maybe who knows, right? But maybe Cubby Broccoli saw that and was like, "You know what? I'm going to keep that. That worked." Probably
Yeah.
not.
No one's going to remember this Climax show. I'll burn all the copies. That'll make sure no one remembers it.
You hear me? I'll burn them all. And then just talking to no one.
Yeah. And that's why it's forgotten, because old Cubby just liked the camera trick. Yeah, so then after the big climax and the credits have been shown, we cut to a host, a guy in a suit looking very nice. And he's introduced as William Luggum, I think.
Luggum, I actually don't know what his name is.
Oh, okay. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, he's like the host. And he's just sitting on this desk and he's holding some sort of contraption and he starts talking about it. He starts talking about what he has in his hand is a shoe. It's not a literal shoe, it's a shoe used in the game of Baccarat, which he talks about being the king of gambling games. And there's a lot of kind of talking here about gambling and this being a big game. And he says the shoe here is how you take out the cards. It's kind of technical, but it's all about, I guess, setting the scene and setting this idea of gambling in this game of Baccarat. And yeah, so he kind of talks about how we're going to see the highest stakes of them all, or we're going to go into a game with the highest stakes. And he talks about this is Climax presenting Casino Royale. And I believe he also said Ian Fleming's name as well, like Casino
Hmm.
Royale by Ian Fleming.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit kind of a bit gangstery. I don't know. I got the impression it's sort of like, yeah, see, talking about gambling. It's like, oh, this has killed men, yeah. It's just, and then he starts flicking these cards out as the camera fades, and it's just, yeah. This is, I think, this is why I mentioned about Twilight Zone earlier, because it sort of has that similar. I can't think of the guy's name who did. Joe in The Simpsons when Bart's doing it, and it's like, walking with the portraits in the background. That
Mm.
guy, kind of, maybe that's just how TV shows were back then. There was like an intro. I just don't get it, but interesting start, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to see this guy kind of just setting the scene in this way. And it was kind of charming. It's a very strange way to start a TV show, but it was the 50s and they were doing this anthology type of series. So just having some guy in a suit just chatting about it. I'm assuming if you watched all the other episodes, this would make a little bit more sense, but I think it kind of works. I don't know if I really got gangster from this guy, but it was a bit strange him like sitting there playing with cards and talking about all the how intense these card games can get. But I thought it was quite cool.
Rod Sterling, that was his name. It came to me.
Rod
That was Twilight
Sterling.
Zone. Yeah, Twilight Zone guy. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, this guy doesn't quite have the same, I guess, uniqueness as that
Yeah,
guy
it doesn't have the
has.
same gravitas, or maybe, yeah, just he did all right. He
Yeah, I
flicked
think he
those
did.
cards well.
Yeah. So it kind of ends with him pulling a load of cards out of the shoe and throwing them down, and that takes us into the actual episode itself. And it comes up Casino Royale Act 1. So this episode is about 50 minutes long, but they did it in acts. And I think that goes back to what you were saying before, that this is almost like a play and it was kind of like this live show in some aspects.
Mm.
I don't think they showed this live because that would be kind of, I mean, maybe they could have done, but it feels pretty insane with the edits in here. I can't imagine this was actually shot live, but they kind of at least try and give the impression that it is somewhat live.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we see a lot of people entering a building, quite a fancy building. It has a doorman in the front, and a few people go in. The doorman's like, "In you go," and then another man tries to come in, and a little gun peeks out from the corner of the camera itself, and then it starts firing, and it's aiming at the man who was about to enter this building. He quickly ducks behind a column. There's like a load of shots going off that hit the column that is hiding behind. We see a load of fancy people inside the building, which is a casino, I'll just say. They're all looking very concerned. And then the man who was being shot at talks to the doorman. He was like, "What's going on? What's happening here?" And they were like, "It looks like he tried to kill me." But the guy who was shooting got away. And then these two enter the building, the man and the doorman. And then like two random people are just talking about it. They're not random as we find out, but they're like, "What happened there?" And they were like, "I heard some shooting." Or the woman, I think, says they heard some shooting. And then we cut to Bond talking to, I believe, the manager of the casino.
Yeah.
And he says, he calls him Mr. Bond. So this is our introduction to James Bond. And the casino manager says, if you need any help, we can get the police involved and they can protect you if it's needed. So Bond then asks for some chips so he can gamble because it's a casino and walks away. So this felt very strange. I don't know if this was supposed to be like high stakes and intensity, but it did just come across, and it's probably not the TV show's fault because it's old. It just came across as very silly, the way this pans out.
Very silly. I was on board. The guy introducing the gun barrel-esque. I was, yeah, okay, and then you get straight to Bond behind this tiny column with these terrible shots. A fatter Bond would have been dead. It'd have been a goner. And you're right, it's just happened so quick. There's no build up to it at all. Well, unless you count like the two people that go in before. It's just kind of cartoonishly quick before he just gets shot at.
Yeah, like I think they actually do a pretty decent job in this episode of setting everything up. Maybe it's just because I know the story of Casino Royale and you do too, so maybe it's not a fair comparison. But I feel like after this point, they actually do a decent job of getting, putting it all together and explaining it to you, even though
I would
there's a lot
agree.
of information. And it kind of makes it disappointing that it starts off with this, that it's very beginning, it's someone being shot at in a very silly way. And then everyone just kind of gets on with it. Like they could have cut this. Like this is
Yeah.
not something that happens in any version of the Casino Royale story. I guess they just added it in to try and make it more intense and to hit you with a bit of a bang, but it just doesn't really come across like that. I would have preferred it if they just kind of, I don't know, allowed it to breathe a little. Bond walks into the casino. We get a better introduction to Bond because instead it's just a man being like, bang, bang, bang. And he's like, oh, goodness. And then he's like, we'll get the police involved. He's like, thank you. And then you're just moving on. It would have been, I know they probably didn't treat the James Bond character with the same weight you would nowadays, but it felt like you don't really get a proper introduction to him because this is your introduction and it's just silly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's new in terms of Bond, but he's still the main character. So
Mm.
even if you don't have all the baggage of the Bond series, you'd still want to treat the main character a bit better than just the first thing you see him do is awkwardly shuffle behind a column, and then go, oh well, that was something, wasn't it? And then just move on with it all. Yeah, I think as you say, from this point on, the way that they pace it all in a matter of 45 minutes to tell a whole story by combining characters and just cutting out large chunks of the story, pretty good. Pretty good. We'll get onto it, but I think they did a pretty good job. But it's just a shame it started like this.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was in the right mood for it because it was just kind of funny. but,
Mm,
but I think when you
that
look
little
at it as an
gun.
adaptation, yeah, it's a little bit weak. Yes, so we see Bond. Yeah, he asks for some chips to play, and then the woman that we saw before is like looking at Bond. She's starting to kind of follow him around a little bit from a distance, and Bond approaches one of the tables at this casino, and you see that they're betting 500,000 francs, and there's like a man who's already standing there who Bond starts talking to, and they say about, oh, there's 500,000 francs, and Bond says it's about $1,500 or £5,000. At this point, Bond is then given his chips as he's kind of talking to this man and watching the game, and he kind of starts explaining the game of Baccarat a little bit as he's talking to this guy. And Bond places a bet for 1,000,000 francs. He ends up winning, gets that money back. And then the guy that he's talking to says, "Oh, I know who you are. You're a legend. I can't remember what the nickname is, but I think he like calls him Jimmy and gives him some
Jimmy
sort of like
Bond.
special
Yeah.
nickname based on his card playing abilities."
I do not like Jimmy. No Jimmy, please.
No, Jimbo is what we like.
Jimbo. Jimbo Bond. Yeah. Is that an American thing?
What,
I don't.
Jimmy?
Well, yeah, like to maybe call James's Jimmy's.
I guess so, but the Jimbo is from GoldenEye, and he was American as well.
Yeah.
So I think that
I don't
probably is
know.
a thing.
Yeah, probably.
I think it's not like, I think it is because he's American that it's like fun to give people nicknames. I think they just like that idea, maybe.
Maybe. But they call him Jimmy Bond a few times, don't they?
They
Throughout
do,
the.
yeah. It's not just this mysterious character, whoever this is. It's other
Yeah.
people. Yeah, so the man introduces himself and he says it's Clarence Leiter and asks if he can go and have a drink with Bond. So they go off, and then as that's happening, we see that the chief is watching Bond with his goons, and they're all like, "Do you want to play the chief?" And he was like, "Oh, we'll play tomorrow." And then the chief speaks to the woman that we've been seeing, and kind of talks about how her and Bond were together, and then she asks like, "Oh, do you want me to go and approach Bond now?" And she's like, "I'll tell you when to approach Bond." So we actually get quite a lot in a very short amount of time. So I guess we'll start with Clarence. For whatever
Yes.
reason, they changed Felix's name to Clarence.
It's just so English sounding. Everyone in England is called Clarence.
I just, I just don't know why. Like, I just don't understand. Like, there's some other name changes which I understand a little bit more, but I don't understand what would have been the problem with calling this guy Felix. Because as far as I can tell in this adaptation, he is just Felix Leiter. Like, that's just the character. Like, there's no change to the character. The only thing they changed is that he's called Clarence.
Yeah, but and they flipped it. So yeah, the main Bond is American and then Felix is English.
Oh, is
Which
that what it is? Is it?
yeah. So which
Oh.
which I think is a smart idea. If you're gonna, it just makes the most sense to do. That they're very easily switchable. In terms of nationalities, they're both agents. So just flip them.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. I got very confused by the accents in this
Right.
because there's a mix of lots of different accents, and everyone also talks with that like 1950s broadcast voice as well,
Yes.
especially Bond, where it's like, see, Baccarat is a thing.
That sort of
Everyone talks like
transatlantic.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I think when they eventually sit down together, he does very quickly say about being in Station S, which I think is meant to be, oh, okay, that's British, which I don't know, but I guess so.
Yeah, but he talks about Washington as well, which is
Mm,
why I didn't quite click that Clarence Leiter was meant to be like a British person because he talks about like he introduces himself and gives like a long, overly long like job title or how he's connected, and it ended with Washington. So I was like, oh, okay, well I know this is Felix, so he's connected to the American agency, but I guess he said Washington because Bond is the American agent, and that's how he gets him to trust him.
yes, I think in that introduction, he says that Bond is from. Wait, I wrote down Combined Intelligence Agency, Washington.
Yeah,
But that's not what the CIA is. CIA is central, isn't it?
yeah, Central.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I guess they just changed it a bit, but yeah. So that's how they've explained both their agent positions.
yeah. I think I know we're going into it now, but when I was watching this, didn't really stress that much about it, to be honest.
No, no, and also at least for me, the version I watched, I don't know whether yours had subtitles or not, or if you watched them with subtitles, but mine didn't, and so some things just I really couldn't hear just because of the recording quality, and things just weren't as good in terms of recording back then.
Well, it's nice to see that this is very faithful to other Bond films and media, where it's like just
Yeah.
let some stuff go, like some of the spy nonsense. It's fine. Oh, bad guy, good guy. All right, cool, got it.
Yeah. I do want to rewind just a second though, because I got a question for you. So
Okay.
when Bond first walks down to the table and the guy spots him and he's talking about 500,000 francs or however much it is, and he starts converting it, oh, that's this much pounds and this much dollars. Is that meant to be like, oh, he can convert currency? Was that meant to be a cool moment?
I think it's more for the audience to give them proper
Oh,
context.
that makes more sense. I thought it was meant to be like, oh, Bond is so smart, he's like a really good agent and he's so clever and he can do that. Your average Joe couldn't do that, but that actually makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's how I took it. Because again, like a lot of this is they're talking about a lot of money. They're talking about francs, and this is supposed to take place in France, but everyone speaks English. They do kind of simplify that stuff as well. So yeah, I think it is just so people know, like, oh, $1,500. Goodness, that's a lot of money.
Okay.
Again, I don't think they really try and show Bond to be super smart in this. Not that he's dumb, I don't think. And they try and make him look a little bit cool, but it's not quite that version we see later on with Bond. It's not quite that Mr. Know-It-All version, I guess.
No, no, it's definitely not. I didn't know. I suppose we can save this bit for a bit later, talking about the Bond character. But I do have some issues with Barry Nelson. Sorry, Barry, but I don't love your Bond. But we get onto it.
Yeah. Well, at least it's not blonde.
Maybe he is. You don't
Okay,
know.
that's true.
It's very dark strawberry blonde.
Yeah, could be. Okay, so yeah, so we get a little bit of an introduction to Le Chiffre here, but I think we'll save that for later because again, it's very quick. This is all about Bond and Leiter having a conversation, but we do get to see Le Chiffre very briefly talking to this woman, and kind of we're getting some of the plot here that Le Chiffre is kind of using this woman to get to Bond in some way because they used to be together. But we'll find out more about that in a bit. So Bond and Leiter, it's really annoying, right? In my notes because I'm not going to write Clarence. I'm just not going to do that. But
No,
normally I would call this character Felix. So instead I always wrote Lighter, but I feel really strange calling him Lighter because I want to call him Felix. But I have to call him Lighter instead because I'm not calling him Clarence. Not doing that.
absolutely not.
No. So Bond and Lighter sit down at a table and they order some drinks. They have a scotch and some water, which I thought was very nice. And Bond also asks for a pack of cards. So this scene is a massive information dump where we go back and forth between Bond and Leiter, where Leiter is part of this combined intelligence agency from Washington, and he's debriefing Bond on what the mission is here today. Something I didn't like about this scene is that Leiter says Le Chiffre a lot, but he doesn't say Le Chiffre.
No.
He says like Le Civa and Le like he just says it differently, which is strange because I'm pretty sure Bond does say Le Chiffre. So you've got one person saying Le Chiffre, and then the other person being like Le Civi, Le Civ, like just making it up, and it made it a little bit more confusing that he just wasn't saying it correctly for some reason.
It does change a lot during this whole show because, obviously we, from the modern Casino Royale, it's a French name, so you'd be like Le Chiffre and you wouldn't really put the R on. Or maybe you would a little bit, but a lot of times in this, it is almost as if it's spelled ER at the end and they just go like Schiffer. And
Yeah.
and it just sounds kind of, sounds a bit, well, not stupid, but yeah, if you're going to say it one way and then keep it consistent, please.
Yeah, that was my problem. Like they would just talk about the same character and just say his name completely differently. It's like, come on, guys, we can get this correct. We don't have to do this.
No take twos. We've got to move on.
No, why they probably didn't have time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, roughly, Leiter says that Le Chiffre is here and he's gambling, and he talks about how Le Chiffre is going to die, and he describes the man. He calls him a toad-like creature, but also says it's very dangerous. But he has a weak spot for gambling. So Le Chiffre is currently down 80 million francs, and he's come to this casino to make up that 80 million because he has 26 million and he needs to make up 80 million. I can't remember exactly how much they explained about the details. Obviously, other Casino Royale adaptations, you get a lot of kind of background story about what's going on here. I think you just get a rough idea and he just roughly explains it, that there's like some bad men going after him. So they're going to try and bankrupt him at this game. And then Leiter is going to publish it in the papers. And then they're just going to let things happen. So they don't have to kill him. They're going to let the people who he owe money to kill him. But I don't think they really go into the details of what that is. It's just there are some people out there who will take out Le Chiffre if he doesn't pay them the money.
Yeah, it's something to do with, because in this he's a Soviet agent. I heard the word Soviet. So yeah, it's a similar story. He's gambled the government's funds, and now they've caught wind of it, and they're going to come after him. But this is all being said kind of in little chunks, isn't it? Because, and I actually I do quite like this scene. Like looking at it back and thinking about it, because it is Bond and the ally having their little catch up, which is becomes very much a staple of everything to come. And they're doing it in this very public setting, so they have to be smart about it. So that's why Bond asks for the deck of cards, because he's explaining how to play Baccarat in between all of these chunks of info from Leiter as a cover. So whenever someone walks past, he's like, oh yes, and then you use these two hands and they're worth 4, and then this is double, and it's like, oh, okay. It's a little bit clunky, not the best acting, but I like the concept of it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree it's a little bit clunky, but it does kind of help sell you on this, I guess, spy sort of world that you're entering here, that this is a little bit secretive, that Bond has to go up to Leiter and they like pretend that Bond has just kind of met him almost, and that they're going to show him the game, and then they're very hush hush and quiet when they're talking about stuff. It's not subtle in any way, but I kind of agree. Like the stuff they're talking about and the way it's framed, it does kind of sell that spy secret agent sort of world, which is surprisingly well done.
Yes, and it helps that they have the little. Well, I assume that's what this was. I wrote down about why did Bond, what's going on with the matchsticks? Why are they breaking them? I'm guessing that was like the code for you know, I'm the other agent. Because they do something where they snap it and put it on the table in a very specific way.
They did, yeah, but they never reference it, do they?
No, so I figured it's kind of like when the code word when he asks for a lighter in From Russia with Love sort of thing.
That would make way more sense. I thought he was just using it as like chips to show how Baccarat was played.
That also makes a lot of sense though, and now mine sounds stupid.
But I mean, the spy thing would kind of make sense because everyone smoked. Like, so by the way, throughout this, like, lots of smoking going on. It's very much
so
that
much,
era.
so cool.
Yeah, just constant cigarettes going. So it would kind of make sense that there would be this understanding of I will light your cigarette and then arrange them in this pattern so we're all on the same page. I could see that, but I thought it was because Bond had the cards and you need to just show how you bet, I guess, in Baccarat. So I thought he was snapping it so he had all these little chips that he could use and represent that as the bets.
I like that too. Let's just say we're both right.
Yeah.
And more credit where it's due. For the first time in all of the things we've watched for Bond and read, I think I actually understand Baccarat a bit now. They actually explain it on layman's terms enough for your average TV watcher to get it, because there's a lot of it later on, and it was a couple lines, right? It was a couple minutes on screen, but I got it, and because before I had no clue what was going on. It was just cards were shown, and then Bond wins or Bond loses, and then whatever. But now, the face cards, they're not worth anything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really helps having Bond just directly explain it. It is a lot of stuff that's like talked about in this short scene, but as you say, they actually do a pretty good job. And to prove how good of a job they do, Joe, why didn't you explain how Baccarat works for
Okay,
the
so
nice
you
people?
have a shoe.
You have a shoe.
You have a shoe, and you have two cards, and it's basically 21. And you get this big paddle, and you flip them, and you bet money, and you win. The end.
Is that it, is it?
Finn.
Bravo, yeah. That's what Bond says, for paraphrasing a little bit.
I'm off to the casino now.
To get rich?
You'll never hear from me again.
Did you say it's 21?
He said it works similarly to 21.
Yeah, but it's 9 in Baccarat.
But it's 9. Yeah. See, and now we know that. Did you know that before?
I guess not, no. No, I agree. I did actually learn a decent amount. I still feel like I'm not 100% on the rules, but you get to know enough. But I'm pretty sure in the 2006 film, they just play 21, don't they? There's no 9 or anything like that there.
But they play poker in the new one.
Oh, is it just poker? Okay.
Yeah. I think
of course it is.
They did. I think it was the 1967 one. There was a bit of actual Baccarat. But then, for that, I probably said in the podcast, I have no clue what's going on.
So. Yeah, same. But I thought that was 21. Oh, yeah, I'm just confusing myself.
Let's watch it again.
No, yeah, you're right. Sorry, we're not watching. We'll do it again. Something I'm going to say is that for the last week, I've actually read the book Casino Royale.
Oh, nice. Okay.
In preparation of this, because I was kind of very curious about, this is the first adaptation. It came a year after the book. Surely this is going to be the most faithful one. And when I was reading the book, there is also a section in that book which is just Bond explaining Baccarat. That also is present there. So it makes sense they would have it in here. And I was, when reading the book, very confused because I was like, wait, it's 9? And the face cards don't mean anything? That's very strange. And the way the betting works is quite different to a poker as well. But again, the book did this and I was confused there. So when I was watching this, I felt like, okay, I roughly know what this is, which was helpful.
Okay. Well, I'll be interested to hear at the end of this kind of your thoughts compared to the book, because it's been years since I read the book. I really can't remember that much of it at all.
So with the lighter character, though, I guess I will say compared to the book and other versions, we don't have Mathis. So basically, Lighter acts as Mathis for a lot of this. Where normally Bond will have 2 allies in this story, Mathis and Lighter, but there's no Mathis. So a lot of this stuff is just him and Lighter talking to each other. When I feel like a lot of the time it's actually more Mathis that Bond is talking to and hanging out with and is a bit more chummy with. But Mathis isn't here, so a lot of these type of scenes is actually just Lighter instead.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so they have this conversation. One thing Leiter does mention about Lashif is saying that he's tough, he's good with a gun, and also he always carries 3 razor blades for slashing purposes. Is how he phrases it.
Oh, so not for shaving.
No, no, he very specifically slashing is what he's doing here.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think he says where they're located, and I want to say he says, "Oh, one of them is in his cigarette case,"
Yep,
because
one's in
that
the
comes
cigarette
up later.
case, one's in his shoe, I believe, which I was getting uh, Rosa Klebb vibes from, and the other one was somewhere else. Who cares?
Yes. And then we get a look at Lashif's guards, who, even back then, the henchmen were silly, I guess, because we have a tall guy who I think was called Basil.
They've all got such weird names.
Yeah, I think the first one's Basil, and you just see him like combing his hair for some reason. Like in the middle of a casino in a suit, this tall guy just combing his hair. And then I think one of them was Zoltan.
Yep.
Then the other one was I have no idea what this other one was. I wrote Sarok because that's what I heard. I don't think it's actually Sarok, but it's something like that. It's a very odd name that I just didn't really hear properly ever throughout this.
I'm glad you wrote those down because I did not.
Yeah. Well, I might be wrong. It's just what I heard.
That sounds about right. The only one, yeah, one's kind of described as a basset hound. One's like, oh, the thin-haired guy with a mustache or something. And I didn't really think they'd be that important, but they do appear a few times actually in this. So yeah, I guess there's a reason why they made an effort to point them out.
Yeah, you needed to. And again, it's a very simple introduction scene. It's just Bond turning around and Leiter describes each of them, but it gets the job done. And I just found it charming that like the henchman became such an iconic part of the Bond franchise. And here we are with this big tall idiot with a comb, like almost like a prequel to Jaws or something like
Yeah.
that. It was kind of nice to see how early on this sort of stuff was in there. Because the book I don't think the book has these exact characters, apart from the guy with the cane. But even the book hints at this type of stuff. But there's no like Basil with a comb. But he does have guards, the chief, and one of them is someone with a cane. So that is important in both this and the book.
Hmm.
So the woman we saw from before, who was talking to the chief and has been following Bond around, approaches the table with Bond and Leiter and introduces herself as Valerie Mathis. And I think it's mentioned straight away that like, oh, Bond and her used to have a thing. There was some sort of relationship there. And there's a bit of back and forth between them. She's kind of like, why were the men shooting at you, Bond? Bond just, I think he says something like, maybe they needed the practice, kind of gives a non-answer, really. And then Bond and Valerie leave together in arms. I think they talk about going to the hotel room. And then at this point, they kind of separate from Leiter, and we see the chief watching Bond and Valerie as they leave the casino, locked in arms, I want to say.
Yeah, it's not particularly. In my notes, I just put that there's a large section where they're just walking to their room, and it's pretty much in silence. It's just strange how they've got such a big story that they need to cram in here, but then they still have these sections where it's like, did they need that? Did they need that section where they walk up out the elevator and then into the room, and they stop and look at the elevator, saying elevator because it was American, lift dial, above the door. I didn't really get that bit, but she seemed.
No, I think they were doing that to set up later when Bond sees the lift going up. But even then, I was assuming people knew what a lift was.
I'd hope so. How are they doing this? How are they...
What is that clock doing? Why is the time going so fast?
Yeah, and also it's interesting that her name is Valerie Mathis. So yeah, even more merging of characters, which is confusing for us now, and I suppose for them, anyone who would have read the book in the year since it would have been out. But I guess it's just, yeah, as you say, what they've had to do to cram it all in.
But it does make sense, though, I would say. Like, I really like Mathis. I would have liked to seen him here. But if you're going to keep, you can't have Bond, Lashif, Vesper, Leiter, like Mathis. You can't kind of have all these characters and have it make sense for what is a 50-minute adaptation. So
yeah,
it was a bit weird, especially with the name changes. Like we already talked about the Clarence Leiter stuff, but The fact that Vesper and Mathis are combined, and now it's Valerie Mathis. It's not even Vesper Mathis.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, it makes sense because they have changed the character, but when you're looking at like an adaptation of Casino Royale, I think I would have preferred if she was called Vesper, even though the character is different. Just so it like it was just a bit off. Like when everyone's calling this, important character Valerie, and you're just like, who the hell's Valerie? I don't why is she so important?
Yeah.
So yeah, so Bond and Valerie, as you say, they like you get a scene of them going to Bond's room and you have to watch them in the lift and then looking at the lift for a bit for some reason. And they enter Bond's room and you see Bond quite like hastily looking around and looking into the bathroom and he talks about like, oh well, you can't be too careful because I think she mentions about, oh, what are you looking for? Do you think somebody broke into your room? He says you can't be too careful. And then Bond puts on some music and it's like this, I guess, jaunty piano music, and it's quite loud. And then we see Bond and them kiss, which I was like, that's a bit strange. Bond then says, "Oh, that's for old time's sake," and Bond then starts talking about how the chief has sent her to him, and he talks about why is there a microphone in the fireplace, and she kind of denies all of this, saying like, I didn't know about any microphone. I don't know what you're talking about." But during this, we can kind of see that like the chief and his goons are listening in the room above. It's something that I think Leiter mentioned before. That, oh, by the way, the goons. I'm going to keep calling them the goons. They're above you in the hotel. So we kind of see that the chief is listening in. So there is a mic or microphone in the fireplace to drop in on them. And then there's like back and forth between the two. So the music is currently hiding what they're talking about, so the sheep can't hear what they're saying. And there's not that much interesting that happens here, I don't think. I didn't make a lot of notes because I didn't find this stuff that interesting. It's just a lot of back and forth between Bond and Valerie about like, oh, what's going on here? What does the chief want to know? Do you still love me? And then afterwards, Bond turns down the music, and we get this whole thing from Valerie saying, "Oh, I still love you. You shouldn't play the game. The sheep are very dangerous. Oh, it's going to kill you. So you shouldn't go, or you shouldn't play the game because they're going to kill you." And then they eventually leave. Bond turns off the music again, and then we have the same conversation at the lift, where Valerie once again is like, "Bond, the sheep's going to kill you." And Bond kind of dismisses a lot of this until she eventually gets in the lift and leaves. Yeah, I think this is where a lot of this adaptation falls down for me with this Valerie stuff because I just didn't find any of it that interesting at all.
No, I didn't. I mean, like you. I didn't really write much in terms of thinking it was important to write. It's just he lets her do what she's there to do, and whilst he knows that the chief is listening. And yeah, then you just have this kind of annoying, repetitive conversation about, oh, do you love me? Oh, blah blah. And you do. I don't know whether like how much you want to go into the chief yet, but every time it does cut back to Lashif listening next to the fireplace or whatever, with the receiver of the microphone. It's just very strange. Like he just doesn't really seem like a very interesting, or not interesting, but villainous character right there. He's just this old man sitting in a chair, and I think later on, when he starts to talk more, he becomes a more interesting character. But the first few parts of seeing Lashif, it's just kind of dull. Like he's just not doing much.
Well, it's the fact that I think he's hanging out with his goons all the time. Like, I
Yeah,
think you would normally expect it that the goons and the henchmen would be the ones doing all this stuff, and they're the ones doing all this groundwork. But as you say, he's also there. So you have him and his three bodyguards all crammed into a room listening to what's going on. And it makes sense. Like, you don't have long in this adaptation. Lashif is the main villain here. So you want him there as much as possible. But as you say, it kind of creates this situation where Lashif is like just doing all the groundwork with his mates almost. And it looks a little bit odd. Like, if he was a better villain, you would think he would detach himself from this because he's too important and has other stuff to do. But instead, we just see him, yeah, like cramming out with his mates, almost like we'll get that bond. Like it's you would expect there like to be a separation a little bit.
yeah, yeah. It definitely feels quite Well, I said before the first guy in the intro seemed like a mafia guy, but now this definitely does seem like a mafia boss and his henchman. And I think it would have been better maybe if they had the time to do this, where it was just all of the goons first trying to stop Bond, and then you see by the end of it, Lashif has got to such a point where all of his goons are gone and he's desperate. That's when he starts to get involved, kind of like the film. Um,
Yes.
but they just can't do that here. So I'm not going to blame the show for that, but it's just a bit of a yeah, especially because it's Peter Lorre as well, and he's a very to be honest, I don't really know what else he's been in terms of other films and things. Maybe he was in a film called M, was like the famous one, but it's an actor that you would probably recognize instantly just because, if not for his face, for his voice. He's just one of
Mm.
those actors that it was very much impersonated. He's got that kind of evil little conniving voice, like kind of creepy, and then he's got his face is very uh unique, I suppose. His eyes, particularly, I think he's got very interesting eyes, which help give the character some interest and makes him stand out from just being another goon-looking guy. But it's almost a bit of a shame that it is Peter Lorre because I don't know how old he was in here. It definitely seems like towards the end of his career, because he does seem quite old. He doesn't really do terribly much, but I don't know. It just seems a little bit sad. Like he's there and he's meant to be this great actor and everything, and I just didn't really get much from him.
Well, I think overall I was still very impressed by the sheaf in this. Like it
Okay.
feels from recently reading the book, it feels like the most faithful to what the book was going for.
Oh, okay.
Like
That's
if
interesting.
yeah, like he is this kind of nasty, horrible person, but he's also this, a bit of intelligence there and a bit of a desperation. The fact I think the book describes him as being like 5'9" and 18 stone or something like that. He's kind of like not short, but like this kind of quite big guy. And in the book, a lot of it comes down to the reason why he's in this mess is because he brought up a load of brothels and prostitution houses in France, and then the French changed the laws and they all got shut down because they made prostitution illegal. So he's kind of framed as this kind of little creepy, kind of almost slightly nerdy sort of guy, I would say. Someone who's kind of got this mean streak and is kind of nasty. But this to me, when I saw it and I saw, yeah, the way he's portrayed in this, I was like, that's the guy. Like that's who he should be. Like this kind of makes a lot of sense the way he's being portrayed. So that's something I
Oh,
kind of really appreciated. This felt like they kind of nailed it in terms of taking that character and putting it on the screen. Probably more than like any other character that we see in this version of Casino Royale.
okay. Well, yeah. That makes me really want to reread the book. Then maybe I should have done that too because I didn't really get that. But if they did manage to get that match, then fair play because I can't imagine there was like a ton of time or maybe even effort really to get this particularly accurate. So if they did do a good job on the sheaf, then yeah, well done.
Yeah, maybe I'm not 100% correct. Some people probably interpret that character differently, but yeah, it felt a lot closer than anything we've seen to me. Than Awesome, like Awesome Wells is not Lashif. Like after reading the book,
What do
like
you mean? No magic tricks?
no magic tricks, nothing like that. Orson Welles was really great in that film, but that is not Lashif. Lashif is not this big figure who's like empowering and stuff like that, and he's not even that version that we got in the 2006 film as well. Again, I think that's a good version of the character, but they always try and make him look too cool to then knock him down a bit, so then he's not cool and it gets a bit mixed. But this one is a little bit more consistent. It's this like weaselly sort of guy with, as you say, that voice, that really iconic like voice. It sounds
Mm.
like something from like Looney Tunes. Is that what I'm thinking of? Something
Yes,
like that.
I think often is it Animaniacs maybe
Yeah,
or
like
like
Pinky
there's
and the Brain, that sort of stuff.
yes, yeah,
Like it's got very much that feel to it. Like it feels like they would. This was probably a voice that inspired some of those characters because it sounds like it's from one of those sort of shorts.
absolutely.
Right. So next up, Bond then returns to his room and turns off the music, and we see Valerie enter the chief's room. And Valerie talks about, "Oh, I did everything that you asked," and the chief is saying if Bond still loves her. It's more back and forth that I didn't find that interesting. I like Le Chiffre, and I think this is probably, I guess, the first time we kind of see him more in his element, where he's just talking about stuff and it's more focused on him. But the Valerie stuff I found dull. And during all of this, we hear Bond call the casino manager and ask, "Can the police please keep an eye on me?" Because the casino manager said before, if you want the police to help protect you, we can do that. So we hear that Bond has done that, and then we hear Bond give a little whistle after he makes that phone call. Because I think what's going on is that Bond knows that he knows that he's being listened to, so he very deliberately is telling the chief that he wants the police to help. I think to try and go along with what Valerie's plan is, which is to try and get Bond scared and frightened. So if
Hmm.
Bond calls the police, it's like the chief's plan is working and Bond is concerned for his own health, even if he hasn't dropped out of the game.
Something like that. I got to admit, I didn't really follow it particularly well. Just to put my hands up.
Sure. It is something
uh,
like that, yeah.
yeah. Also, I want to say now, don't call me a sicko, you or anyone else listening to this, but I would have liked as well that you're talking about the scene between the chief and Valerie. I wanted the chief to be creepier, and like especially around her, because I feel like, especially what you said now about the character in the book, about kind of where he invested his funds, and is um, probably a very creepy man. So I would have liked if there was, because I never really felt like there was any sort of jeopardy between, well, not even Bond really in most of the scenes, but particularly her. And I would have liked if he was just a bit nastier and a bit more of a sleaze. But I imagine they probably couldn't show that on TV in the 50s. But I think it would have worked.
I suppose so. I mean, it would have helped. I mean, for me, the Valerie character is just not interesting at all. She is just the person who's the ex for Bond. And, there is a reveal later about her, but even then, I don't think it changes that much. Like, this Valerie character does not go through the same steps that Vesper goes through. And in
Oh,
the
no.
original Casino Royale, most of this is about Vesper. Like, a lot of it is about Vesper and Bond. And what happens with her is like the core part of the book, where with this one, we get the new character, Valerie, and all she does is like, I love you, James. I don't love you, James. I'm working for the chief. I'm not working for the chief. And it just kind of like feels so disconnected from the rest of the story that you actually could have been totally fine by cutting this character. It doesn't really go anywhere or add much. And most of the time, she's just in the room looking scared. And that's kind of it. And it's, if they're not going to do the Vesper thing, I think that's fine. I think you could probably get away with a more to the point story of James Bond versus Le Chiffre. But the fact that we just have this Valerie character who's just around and making things a bit more complicated, she didn't add enough for me overall.
No, probably not. It's the truth of it is, it's just they probably they needed the woman on screen. It was that time, wasn't it? You got to have the woman for the hero to kiss, and at the end, and they're going to be together, sort of thing. So after that, we cut to Leiter, Clarence. I'm going to call him Clarence, actually.
Oh, that's not confusing.
That's just confusing. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, he picks up some money from the kind of casino desk, and goes to make a phone call. Now, I believe this phone call is related to the story being published that he touched upon earlier. How they want to kind of have this story ready to go about Le Chiffre losing all his money, sort of thing. Am I right with that?
Yeah, I think so as well. Like he calls the guy Mr. Rudy. But yeah, I think this is just tying into what, as you say, Felix says, Leiter, God, said earlier, which is that their big plan is to publish this story. So we just kind of are reminded of that for this.
Right. Which, yeah, anyway, it's just a strange strand of the story. But as he's done with the phone call, there's a goon. A goon appears behind him. Is that one Basil? No, that was not Basil. That was
No, it's not the big one.
Zoltan. No.
Yeah,
Is it Zoltan?
I think so. It's one of those two.
He walks up behind Leiter, and he's got his gun out, and he hides it under a jacket, and he's got it facing him, and he's basically asking him for all of that money he's just put in his pocket. What was all that money, by the way? Was that the money for James?
Yeah, so they have it here where like Leiter is giving Bond the mission, so he's kind of like basically the one setting it all up. So he
Mm.
took out the 26 million to give to James, but gets interrupted by this goon.
A terrible, terrible goon. So yeah, he has his gun hidden under the coat, and he has lots of opportunities to do it. And he's like, you got 10 seconds, or give me the money. And before that happens, the phone rings, and the manager comes over, and it all gets interrupted. And he Leiter very quickly is like, "Oh, please take this money and go give it to Bond, ready." And then that's it. So the goon missed his chance, and then he just kind of looks at Leiter, doesn't do anything. He's like, "Oh, rats," sort of thing. So yeah, definitely get an impression already that the goons aren't the best of the bunch, aren't the brightest, that's for sure.
They're definitely not intimidating. Like any intimidation stuff, I think you do get some of that from the Sheaf, but these people are just silly. Like not quite the Three Stooges level, but they just walk around be like, "I've got a gun," and then when like Leiter gives away the money, you have him like looking all smug, like, "I guess I don't have it now," and then walks off, which just again just removes all the threat that these people could have.
Yep. So then we see Bond go and pick up the money, ready for the card game. Leiter appears again. There is a lot of Leiter, and is this? I think he briefly mentions about he tried his luck at baccarat and it didn't really work. He lost his shirt, he says, as he gives Bond another cigarette. So much smoking, honestly.
Mhm.
It was the 50s though, so it was good for you back then, right? And before Bond gets into the card game, there's a little meeting of him, Valerie. I keep wanting to say Vesper, and Le Chiffre, because Le Chiffre and Valerie are together, and there's just a bit of the pre-game back and forth between Bond and the villain, where they both know each other, but they can't outright say it. So it's just sort of a good luck, and you too, and sort of they know what's going on.
I really like that moment, actually. I thought that was really cool. Like, I like how Le Chiffre acts very differently when he's talking to Bond in this one. He's like almost smiley and nice, what he's
Yeah.
trying to be. So, hello, Le Chiffre is just a nickname, you see. And it's just like actually being quite nice. I thought that was an interesting take, especially because he is not like that for any other scene in the rest of this episode.
That's right, because they talk a little bit about that name. Like, so what is the translation of Le Chiffre? Just like a code name or something? There
So
was
yeah,
something
so
in there.
this comes directly from the book. I have it right here. Maybe I should just read it. So
Please
basically,
read
like
it.
the second chapter of the book, I think, is just a huge plot dump or exposition dump that explains who Le Chiffre is, why this is happening. It's just a very intense. This is what it is. So it starts off by saying, a project for the destruction of Monsieur Le Chiffre, alias the Number, Herr Number or Herr Cipher. Hair Cipher, I think. And I think what they're talking about here, where he's saying, like, after the war, I felt like just a number and I was dismissed. And that's why he called himself Le Chiffre, because it means the number, because he just sees himself as another number. So I think so this happens in this episode. And as far as I'm aware, it comes directly from the book. Although I don't think any other adaptation ever touches upon this fact.
No, I mean I didn't know that's where it's from. Even though I have read the book, I just guess I completely forgot it since then. So it is kind of cool that they at least have these little moments of accuracy.
Yeah,
From
throughout this episode, there are very direct stuff from the book, which is
yeah.
cool. They change a ton of stuff from the book, but I think more than any other adaptation, you have these more direct moments that you can directly relate to the book, which is really cool.
Yeah. So after that, Bond they'll go sit down at the table, ready to play. Just as he's getting ready, someone comes over. Mr. Bond, you've got a phone call. He goes back. And I should also point out now that this is obviously not a huge amount of money can be spent for this TV show. It's just one story. So it is just one set. And then you've got like the rooms and like the lift bit in the hallway. But they really get their money's worth out of this casino set. I tell you, like they change their angles all the time. You can tell when later on when Leiter is like walking away and it cuts and he's meant to be in a different place. It's like, no, you're just back at the desk again. It's like a really small space. So Bond goes over to the phone and you realise it's about 2 steps away from the table. So it's kind of silly when I saw that. But he goes and answers the phone and it's this mysterious voice saying that if he wins this card game, then Valerie will lose. She's going to die. That's what that means. Okay. Which his reactions to this are. He's just he kind of does like a like a like a neck pull thing. His face is like, damn, that's kind of annoying actually. Doesn't really have much
Like
much
I don't
presence, I
mind
think.
the idea of some of this stuff where Bond is quite dismissive of Valerie. That kind of happens throughout this. That he's kind of very much like, oh, I don't really care. But yeah, this is not a cool collected Bond. In some ways he is, but in a lot of ways you just get all these like moments you would never get normally in any other version where it says, oh, rats, or and we're gonna see it quite shortly. There are just times where he like emotes in a way that just doesn't feel like James Bond at all. And they just kind of didn't quite get it right. But I don't even think in the book he emotes in this kind of way. So Barry Nelson is kind of taking this approach, and you just get these little moments like that. Just doesn't feel right, and it just means he doesn't quite feel like Bond when all is said and done.
No, no. But he gets back to the table, and is this what? So, by the way, the version I watched of this didn't have Act 2 for some reason. But is this is Act 2 now? We're moving into.
Yes. So the version I watched on the Blu-ray, what happens is that he sits down. They're just about to play the game. I think Leiter comes over, and Bond tells Leiter to keep an eye on Valerie because Bond is still somewhat worried about it. And then Bond sits down, and then it fades to black completely, and that's the end of Act 1.
Right. And we move on to Act 2. And a large portion of this is the card game. They're there, and it's a very crowded table. The Chief's there. The Chief's the one with the bank, the bonk. And knowing what we know now, thanks to the helpful guide earlier from Bond, you kind of know that, people are betting against him. And there's a guy. Well, I'm not going to go into it. Like, it's quite dry. I'm going to be honest. This whole scene, I think, unless it's shot in a really interesting way, I just think this type of footage is just inherently going to be quite dull. A card game being played, and this is 1954. It's not going to be like 2006 Casino Royale where they really amp up the tension. It's very plain static shots sometimes, and a few close-ups of some cards here and there, and it basically plays out that Bond bets and loses the first time around. Surprise, surprise. I don't know if you found anything more interesting to say about this that I'm missing, but
I mean,
it was
I quite liked it, to be honest. I
Okay.
like the dryness.
Okay.
I kind of like that they just showed a game of Baccarat, and that's all that happens. I thought that
The
was kind
whole
of
game.
interesting. It's not as stylized as the 2006 one. It's not, super crazy, but you know the rough rules of it, and it's just kind of nice to see them go back and forth. And I don't know. I thought it had its own charm to it. Like, there's not much character in it. It's super basic the way it's shot for a lot of the time. It's not even like, in the 2006 version, you kind of get a sense of each of these characters, and there's more kind of details thrown in. Yes, it's missing a ton of that, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just a nerd, but I liked seeing the numbers go up and seeing all the hands being drawn. I thought that was kind of cool in a way, and just seeing the Chief just doing all of this. One thing I did get confused by is that I don't know why the Chief had the shoe and was the bank.
Yeah, I thought it got passed around.
Yeah, like, I guess this is how it's set up, but I thought the bank was a separate entity, and I'm pretty sure in the book, although this made me doubt it, that that's true. That there's the bank, and the bank puts down the bets, and then the sheep is playing as part of the game and betting against the bank. But as far as I can tell in this one, the sheep is the bank, and anyone playing is betting against the sheep, which just feels odd.
Actually, that actually, you explaining that, no, that does make sense though, because don't they say, oh, the Chief has bought out the bank or something? Like for this is like a special game where he is basically. I swear there's a line about that.
I think that's probably true, but I think that's something they changed for this.
Right. Oh yeah, I'm saying in the show there's a line earlier on that says that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, again, typically when you watch these type of games, that's not how it works. So it's a change that I didn't really like, if I'm being totally honest. I would have liked it if it was still Bond and the Chief going up against the bank and having it play out like that. Because instead, I mean, it does simplify it, I suppose, but to me, it made it more complicated because it's like, well, I don't think this is how this works. But I mean, if there's a line for it, I guess it's okay. But about halfway through is when I realized the Chief was the bank because they have
Yeah.
someone talking about the bank. Because there's a guy there who's like, this is what the bets are. The bank is betting this. The Chief doesn't say that. So there's just a dude there hanging out who you would expect to be the bank, but no, the Chief's the bank. So I mean, it sounds like most people wouldn't care. It sounds like you didn't care, but,
Not
to me, it
particularly,
wound me
no.
up a little bit.
Yeah, this scene it's. I mean, I just described it earlier being a bit dry and not to my taste. But on the other hand, if it did have more character in there, that if it had some lines between the Chief and Bond, and just a quip or two to each other, I guess that would take away from the character of the Chief. Like, he's just there to win. He just needs to win. He's a gambler. He doesn't care about anything else. He's not like the world uh, dominating villain. He just wants the money. So I guess in that regard, it makes sense that it is quite quiet and it's just the cards being shown and very just functional and plain. And I think that's fine for the Chief. Although I wish Bond was a bit better in this scene because he does lose. Obviously, he loses his first um, pot of money, and I just think Barry Nelson doesn't do anything. It's kind of he looks a bit. What did I write in my notes? Bond doesn't look cool, and I
No,
mean I know he's losing, so you can't look that cool when you're losing. But he just looks. I mean, you said it. It just doesn't seem like Bond, really.
no. So, like, I guess in Casino Royale, the 2006 version, you have that a lot of intensity for Bond, right? The way Daniel Craig holds himself as Bond on that table and the way the Chief is,
Yeah,
you get that dynamic, and that just isn't there. And I would agree about him not being cool. And I think this was the thing that annoyed me most about Barry Nelson playing Bond. Bond would not be at the table being like, "Oh, for goodness, this
yeah,
isn't going well
rubbing
at
his
all."
head.
Like, he was so visibly nervous and out of place. And I get it from the sense of you need to show that he's losing, but you have a pile of money that is pulling away. And I feel like in every other version of this story and who James Bond is, he's cool and collected even when things are going badly. And it's very odd to see a Bond who's there just like the sheep is the one that's cool and collected, and Bond's there like, oh, good no, yeah, I don't, what am I gonna do? Oh no. And that was bad. Like they should not have done that. Like Bond should not be reacting in that way. And in the book, he doesn't react that way at all. He just like they have it in the book where he is worried about this stuff, but it's all in his head. And they very explicitly talk about how he keeps his cool and doesn't show his emotions. And actually, he's very intensely staring down Lashif for a ton of the match because Bond is
Mm.
trying to take him on and take him out quite deliberately. So when you then cut to this, that they changed it to have Bond be like a fidgety goose in his chair, it's very lame. It was just a very bad way of portraying this character here.
It was. And whilst we're on this topic, I'm just going to go all into poor Barry now. Another thing this was obvious when you first saw Bond because he doesn't get changed. He just looks bad as well. I'm not saying the actor. His hairstyle's kind of strange. He's got a very pointy centre bit in his forehead. Whatever. I don't care about his hair. But the did like the jacket he's got on, the suit jacket, dinner jacket, whatever you want to call it. It looks like it just doesn't fit him, and it's also this strange color, and it's difficult to know what it actually was, being in black and white. But it definitely wasn't black, and it definitely wasn't white. So it must have been this strange mid color, and it just looks really baggy on him, and he just doesn't look the part at all.
No, like he's dressed kind of smartly, but he's not even wearing the same color suit trousers. I want to say, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Like, yeah, he's just kind of in like smart. Well, it's more smart than casual, to be fair, but yeah, especially because he's surrounded by a lot of fancy looking people as well. Like this casino is filled with people who are clearly very rich. And then you have Bond there who I don't think he looked terrible to be fair, but he didn't look like Bond is supposed to look like he belongs in these places and be comfortable in his own skin and yeah, Barry doesn't pull that off.
Yes, comfortable. That's a good point. That's a good way of putting it. It's always kind of hands in his pockets, looked uncomfortable. Kind of gave me the impression of back being 16, 17, like going to the school prom and everyone's got suits that don't quite fit them yet because their mum says, "Don't
Mm.
worry, you'll grow into it." I didn't, mum. I look stupid.
You want to talk about that, or should we?
We'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bond loses all of his money. Can't remember. Is it 20, 26 million?
Yeah, so he had 26. So then, like, the way this plays out is that the bets keep going up and up, and he keeps matching the bets, and then he just loses every time until he has nothing left.
Oh dear. But it's okay, because just as he's almost out, he gets a note passed to him under the desk sort of thing. He unravels it and it says, here's 35 million. Can't remember. It does say something else.
Yeah, it
Just
says you
here's some
have to
money.
win.
You have to win. And then someone brings over an envelope and it's full of loads of money. And like really awkwardly, they have to be like, "Oh, sorry, Bond, we need to count this." So what? Why? Why do they include this bit of this man counting the money? Just get on with it. But anyway,
Would you like to know why?
Okay,
It's
I would
because
actually.
of the book.
Okay, all right.
So you know the scene with the guy in the cane that happens in a bit?
Yes.
That
Yes.
happens here while they're counting the money.
Oh, as a sort of distraction.
Yes. So while everything's being counted and everyone's busy and looking around, that's when the cane scene happens because it takes a while for it to count. And then that's when that all plays out. And that, and then he's allowed to bet and keep going afterwards. It's not separated. So because they
Oh.
moved it, as you say, there's a really awkward bit here where they have to count the money and everyone's just sitting around for like 20 seconds while they're counting the money. But there was a
Yeah,
purpose for it in the original book. They just rearrange things in a way that just means you have this awkward, strange moment that doesn't make sense.
that's bizarre. Why would they do that? Because it is, as you say, it's 20 seconds or so, and it's not as if you'd imagine in a casino if they have to count money. I don't know. I don't go to casinos very often, but they'd probably have to do it a bit more properly than just a guy flicking his fingers through the notes next to the table.
Mm,
Yeah, looks right. All right, go on then. But okay, that's good to know. Let's see. I'm glad you did that, Tom. That's some good homework. Well
thank you.
done. So yeah, Bond's got his pot again. He's got 35 million. He's back in the game, and he wins. Basically, I don't know. It's long story short. They play some more cards, and he wins. Anything interesting happen in that bit? Because I didn't write anything down.
Not particularly, like, because they've changed the way the bank works and they've changed, like, this is mostly faithful to the book, but they've just changed stuff a lot. So it doesn't quite work. Like, yes, Bond loses in the book, and then he does get money at the table, which I thought was really cool that this did it the same way. It's just then, for some reason, it's 35 million, but it's 35 million because they put in an extra hand in there to make it work. So I think they had to do that due to the sheep being the. But they just mess with it in a way that's just unnecessary. So it's not really
Mm.
bad when you watch it because you don't know, but it's just a little bit awkward. But yeah, it's just they draw cards and Bond has better cards, and good cards mean he wins, and he just wins.
This time, Bond win.
There's just no
Basically,
skill in it. That's the thing, right? Like
yeah.
in the book and other ones, you kind of get more of an insight in terms of, why Bond is doing what he's doing. This one, he just like, rats, I lost. All right, I'll just try again. Oh, I got a good card. Cool. All right, thank you, everybody. Like, they don't really set any of that stuff up in this version. It's just drawing cards until Bond eventually wins.
Yep, and he does. So Lashif gets up and walks out, kind of looking dismayed. Obviously, not overly so, but he kind of like shoves some people out of the way. Like, I'm leaving. And then as everyone starts to move away from the table, game's over. There's all this kind of shuffling. It is one of the goons, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, one of the goons comes over to Bond, who's still seated, and he's got a cane in his hand, and he kind of sticks it down. I've got to be careful here what I say. Sticks it down like underneath Bond's back, and says that this is no cane; it's actually a gun. So you say this is from the book?
Yeah, this is in the book. The cane
I love
gun.
that. I love the cane gun, and he is basically saying that this will blast your spine and you're in silence or whatever, and you've got to go and give the money to the chief, right?
Yes.
That's it. And maybe this bit would be menacing, but as we have previously described, it's the goons, so it's really not. And you may wonder, well, how on earth does Bond get out of this situation? He's got a gun against his back and, seated. What is he going to do? Well, he just sort of like pushes back a little bit and then a bit of a kerfuffle, and then he he gets the cane. There's really not much to it.
No, like they should have just cut this. Like in the book, it wasn't really amazing because I think they're somewhat faithful in terms of what happens specifically here. All Bond does is throw himself backwards, and it's like, whoa! And everyone's like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I guess so." But the thing that made it work in the book is that you have the countdown. So he says, "I'm going to count to 10," which happens in this as well. But you get all of Bond's thoughts and what he's thinking, and him calculating stuff and thinking about what could happen and the stakes, and that's what makes it interesting. But when you take away all of Bond's thoughts, it's just him falling over in a chair, like, and it's just none of that intensity comes off across here. I think they should have just cut this and just not had it at all.
Yeah, especially with the change they already did with the money being counted. I would have liked to have seen the cane gun be used, but I guess if it's not in the book, then it's not going to be used in this. But it has that sort of silliness to it, like a cane gun. Ooh, show me more. But then
once again, they have that silly henchman sort of stuff in there. A cane gun. It's silly, but like it feels like Bond, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah. The goon runs off. Cane drops to the floor, and Bond picks it up and gives it to Leiter, who comes over. And I guess at this point now he's worried about where Valerie. Where Valerie's gone to, having had the phone call. He's done exactly what he planned to, but now, oh no, Valerie's missing. She's in danger. So I think he asks Leiter to go and take a look as well.
This section's a mess. Are you going to try and like break down everything that happens in the next 2 minutes?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Because the reason why I just paused is to look at my notes to try and figure out what comes next. I know that Leiter runs around for a bit. He sees someone who he thinks is Valerie, but she turns around and, oh no, it's just a similarly dressed woman. And then he does see the goon again, and maybe just... Does he point... He has the cane gun still, doesn't he?
Yeah, so he ends up with the cane gun.
Does he use that on the goon? I can't actually remember.
Yeah, this gets very messy very quickly, where it's like the game is finished. Bond then just starts running around for Valerie because I think the reason why is because Bond talks to Leiter and Bond says, "Thank you for the 35 million to win." But then he says that Valerie gave him the money instead.
What?
And that triggers all this, like, what's happening here? We gotta go find Valerie. Where's that Lashif fella? Because Lashif has run off as well. And it's just Bond and Leiter running off like headless chickens in different directions, trying to, like, where's Lashif? Where's Valerie? And it's very, again, very silly. But this just happens super quickly. And as you say, it's Leiter pointing a cane gun at someone, saying, like, you better tell me what I want to hear. And he's like, I don't know. I don't know you.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I will jump ahead though, because we do see Bond. I think Bond goes to her hotel room, but it's locked, so she's not there. And then he goes to his hotel room, and I think he talks to Leiter again on the phone, probably, because he's still got the check. That's the whole thing. He's got the check for the winnings. So now Leiter's like, oh, you're hot. They're gonna come after you. And then you see Bond grab a screwdriver from the hotel room and go to the front door. And I had no clue what was going on at this point. It was only afterwards I realised, but he starts to unscrew or do something. I actually thought at first what he was doing, which is so stupid. I don't know why I thought this. I thought like, oh, was his hotel room number like 9 and he's going to flip it to be a 6 and then they're not going to know where they are.
Oh, I do the old, well, it can't be here. That's the wrong number.
Yeah, not my finest moment, but no, he's unscrewing the plaque of the room number to hide the check. That's what he's doing. So it's behind there. There we go. That makes more sense. I could not be a spy. I don't
Also,
think.
just very quick, I know I've been saying this a lot. That's from the book. That's exactly where he puts the check in the book.
Okay, so no number turning around in the
No,
book.
he didn't. Looney
Are you
Tunes,
sure?
Albuquerque's that way. Nothing like that.
Uh, starts to paint a big tunnel
Yeah,
on one of the
they all
walls.
run into it. Just puts on a dress. I saw James Bond go that way. Thanks, ma'am.
But yeah, so he goes back into his hotel room, and Valerie appears. Hey, she's there, she's safe. So she comes up to Bond, but then, oh no, then Le Chiffre comes in as well. So he's there with his goons, and it's at this point where you realise that Valerie is actually a French agent. She works for some French-sounding ministry, and yes, she's, Bond was like, oh, why didn't you tell me? And there's probably more to this, but I was kind of not listening very much.
I don't think there is much more to it, to be honest. I think
Is there not? I felt like there was definitely more in like her being a French agent, but I
that's
just can't
it.
remember.
She's just a French agent here to stop Le Chiffre alongside Bond. And also she's
Okay,
in love with Bond. I think that's it.
okay, because yeah, Le Chiffre, it's got the gun out, so that's how he's being threatening at the moment. He's got his goons there, and he goes and sits down, and he's keeping it very casual. He's just like, tell me where the check is, Bond. I need to know where the check is. I need the money. Give me the money. Where's the check? And then that's in Act 3, right? Then it's like
Yeah, so
it
this is when we
fades to
get a
black.
fade to black where Le Chiffre is threatening Bond because he's got guns, right? It's him and his goons with guns. So it's like, tell us where we get the check. And then it's like, da da da. And then it fades to black. And that's the end of Act 2.
I feel like there is some okay dialogue here from Peter Lorre. I remember thinking like, oh, this is actually a bit more like it. What it's saying. For the life of me, I can't remember what it is now. So maybe it can't have been that good. But it was some good. It was some good filler, like villain filler lines.
Yeah, I
That's
really do think Le
vaguely
Chiffre
what I
was the
remember.
best part of this by far. And these sort of scenes where he just gets to be this creepy guy with a gun talking to Bond. Yeah, that's when
Yes.
he's really just where it's all about him being the villain. He does a really good job at it. And yeah, overall, I
Yes.
think Le Chiffre is the main reason to watch this is to see this portrayal of Le Chiffre because I think it is actually quite good overall.
Hmm.
It was also really, it didn't feel right for when Le Chiffre say like, I wanted to use Valerie to get to Bond, but he calls him like the American or this American. I'm like,
Ew.
I was trying to not think about the fact that Bond's American, but the fact that Le Chiffre calls him the American, I'm like no, no, just felt icky,
Don't do that. Yeah.
very icky. So yeah, so like Le Chiffre has busted in, got the guns, it fades to black, and then we come out of black, and it says Casino Royale Act 3. And we see Bond has passed out on the floor. They don't show him being knocked out on anything, but as far as I'm aware, he is passed out. And Bond then tries to fight off the goons, and they just able to like knock him down. With Le Chiffre kind of in the corner, kind of watching this. And the phone goes off. So yes, Valerie's been tied up. She's been gagged. She's tied up in the corner. Le Chiffre and all his goons are there with guns, and Bond is like kind of been apprehended. So the phone goes off. One of the goons helps Bond answer the phone, and we hear that it's Leiter. And Bond says he found Valerie, and he's not allowed to give any clues. But I think he tries to give him a clue by saying, I'm sorry you lost your shirt. But it's a
Yeah.
clue that doesn't go anywhere, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Because that's like the third time that line's been mentioned.
Yes. Because before Bond and Leiter were saying about this, and Leiter said, "Oh, I lost my shirt playing baccarat." So Bond saying, I'm sorry you lost your shirt," or "I lost you your shirt," something like that. I was like, "Oh, that's a code," but it's a code that never pays off.
Come on, Tom. Tell me it's from the book. Come on, I know you
No,
want
it's
to.
not from the book.
Damn it.
There's nothing like this that happens. So yeah, we are very much changing a lot of what happens now. I mean, I guess some of this stuff is still the same, but we are still in Bond's room, and the whole last act here is in Bond's room. So, as you mentioned before, Joe, a lot of this takes place in like one or two sets, So you have
Hmm.
the casino set, and then you have like the room set, and that's all you get for the entire episode, which I kind of like. It's kind of interesting to have this story all take place in the casino, and if you're going to condense down the story, it makes sense to be in the casino. But it does mean like the final act just has to take place in Bond's room instead, which is very different to what any other version of the story does.
Yeah, and I also like how it does make it feel like it's all just sort of real time, more or less. I know we just had a few fades to black and some time passing, but it does start at the night, and then there might be, yeah, it does. I think there is one overnight because it's like tomorrow's the game. But apart from that, it does feel like it's all happening very live, which I quite like the feeling of.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not necessarily a proper play, but I think those elements do give it a different feel. And the
Hmm.
idea of it's all around this one casino game in this one casino, I think that was a smart way of doing it. It was probably done for money reasons and because they don't have all these sets and stuff, but I thought that was really smart. It gave it a different feel, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So the goons take Bond to the bathroom to put him in the bathtub, and Le Chiffre removes the gag from Valerie's mouth. He's doing more like villain stuff, like just acting villainous. And he tells her that if you scream, then Bond is going to be killed. And then we go into the bathroom where Bond is in the tub. I don't think he's tied down. No, he is tied down. He has to be, hasn't it? I think they've tied him up
Hmm.
at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bond is tied up in the bathtub, and the chief starts saying like, "Where's the money? Like, I need the money," and talks about how he's going to torture Bond. And Bond's like, "You should stop talking. You're really ugly." Ha ha ha. Just not intimidated, not impressed. The dynamic here is very much, again, it's not like other stuff. I guess it's kind of like Casino Royale 2006, but in the book, and I'm sorry for bringing up again, I guess, that the chief is kind of the one in control, and Bond is very much the beaten, broken man. And the chief even says about how, like, I don't actually need the money at all. It would just be nice to get it. But in this one, the chief is like, "Please, you gotta give me the money, man. Like, I need the money so bad." And Bond is like, "You're ugly." And he's like, "Oh, give me the money though."
Oh, that's mean.
It is a bit mean. I thought Bond was being a bit mean. But even saying that, I think the Chief still has quite a nice presence here. I think the performance is strong enough that it works. But yeah, it is a little bit of a different dynamic to what I think you would see in other versions.
Yeah, and this is where I was saying earlier about, like, I think just the fact it is Peter Lorre and his mannerisms and his voice and the way he looks. I don't know if he's ugly. I think that's maybe a bit. It's just different looking. Um, I think that just helps so much with that because I wouldn't say he's really. I would say he's really acting that much. He's obviously acted, but he's not putting in his. It's a TV show, right? He's not going to put in the full clout of effort. But yeah, what he does is fine. But I think just the fact it's him really helps a lot as well. Just makes it the character, as you say, probably one of the better things about this.
Yeah, I mean, he just has real presence, right? He
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
carries a lot of this, even if the writing's a little bit off and some of the setups a little bit off. And when we have Barry Nelson, just also Bond being cocky and tortured just doesn't do a good job of that. Some of it is the writing, but yeah, I didn't really buy him as being tortured in the bathtub and also being like, "Oh, I don't care. It just didn't really work. So I like the Chief in this scene, but Bond in this scene just comes across as a bit naff. Just not.
hmm,
Just it. The performance just isn't there.
yeah.
So we then get the Chief saying like, I want the check. Where is the check?" This time Bond goes quiet. So the Chief is holding like these tweezers. No, are they tweezer pliers? Is that the correct word?
Yeah, some pliers,
Yeah,
yeah.
like a pair of metal pliers. And I think the implication here, because you don't see it, is that it's ripping off Bond's toenails?
Right. I did wonder because you do see Bond with his little toes out at the end of the bath. So you figure it's something to do with that, whether he's just like crushing the toes or ripping off toe. Yeah, that sounds worse. Like that sounds more torturous.
That's what I'm guessing, because they don't show, it's very amateur. Like they have him kind of holding these tweezers or the pliers, and then they just like cut away with like no audio or anything like that. And it's Bond just very badly acting, but like, oh, ooh,
Oh.
no. Like it's very, very weak. the idea of Bond being tortured here. But again, you don't see it, and he doesn't say it at all. You just see Bond's toes, and the sheep has some pliers, and then they cut away before you see anything. So the only thing I can think of is that he probably didn't rip off his toes, and crushing his toes probably wouldn't be enough. So I'm assuming toenails, but they don't show it at all. So I guess it's whatever you want it to be involving his feet and pliers.
Well, whatever it was excruciating.
Oh, he was
For
in such
sure.
pain.
Ow!
No. Ew.
I do wonder if this is just. Is this just Barry Nelson not being a great actor? Is this just what TV was like back then, where they just didn't have that? They just didn't go that full range. It almost feels more like a stage play, as you've said. Is that it?
I think so. I would guess it's a bit of both. That's what it feels like anyway. That Barry's not particularly great in this role, but I don't think there would be any expectation back in the 50s to actually kind of really sell and give a ton of weight to the idea of being tortured.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, so Bond's being tortured. Bond, again, still not impressed. He's like, I've already destroyed you, Le Chiffre. You won't get anything out of me. And then Bond talks about how the check won't help because they'll just trace it and you won't be able to use it. And then Le Chiffre says, don't worry, I have a story here and a plan where I'll say that me and you had a rematch and you lost. So I got the check and then I can cash the check and I'll be rich. And Bond's like, darn, he's got a watertight story here. I can't argue against that. And then that
I'm
goes
going to be
away.
honest. I heard that differently. I could be wrong here because
Okay.
mine is a lot more stupid. But I wrote it down because I thought it was so stupid. I thought his plan, Le Chiffre's plan, was that his story was going to be Bond felt bad for him and just gave him the money back.
Oh, was it?
Like, I could be wrong there, but that's what I wrote. Is like Bond would give him the check back. That's his plan.
So part of the reason why I described it like I did is because of the book, where it was stupid in the book as well, because I think it's just ridiculous. But I think that's roughly how it's described in the book. That
Okay.
Because Bond says the exact same thing to Le Chiffre when being tortured, like you can't cash it anyway. And then Le Chiffre explains like, oh, don't worry, I'll just say we had a rematch and this time I won, and then you got really upset and drove away because you were really sad about losing, and then I'll just cash it and it'll be fine. So I assume that they just kind of copied it for this. But even then, I would say it's dumb in the book. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they got to have some explanation, but either the book one, this one, or the one you're thinking of, either way, they just throw that in there with this really half-baked story about them just playing again with absolute no evidence, just so Le Chiffre could lose that check.
Yeah. They were doomed.
Yeah. So Bond is now in the chair, or no, it's still in the bathtub. Sorry. And Le Chiffre then sends one of the henchmen to go after Leiter, and we get a little bit more torture of Bond. And this is where Valerie breaks instead because she's in the room, and she says like, "Oh no, I saw Bond use a screwdriver." And Le Chiffre and the goons are like, "Okay, screwdriver. We're going to go and search the room." So they leave Bond and Valerie in the bathroom alone while they'll try and find this screwdriver, see what happened here. And we see that Bond sees Le Chiffre's cigarette case. So when Le Chiffre left, he left his cigarette case. And we saw this earlier. I can't remember if we mentioned it, but at the
Yes, yeah,
Baccarat
during the
table,
game.
yeah, during the game, you see that there's a razor blade in his cigarette case. So Leiter mentioned it before. You actually physically see it during the Baccarat game, and now it's here for Bond to use. So Valerie starts talking about just some random story. I don't know if you have any details for what that story
Oh
was.
God, yeah, that was I zoned out of that completely, which I think was kind of the point anyway, wasn't it? It's just she's covering while he fumbles and
Yeah,
gets
I
himself
just
free.
so uninterested in what Valerie was saying.
Yeah,
So Bond, there. So Valerie gets the cigarette case, drops it to Bond, and then Bond uses the razor blade to untie himself. You don't really see that at all. He just kind of does it, but fine. At this point, then Bond hides against the wall, so he's now free, and he hides it kind of against the back wall where the door is, and then asks like, "Can I get some water?" And dear old Basil walks in, and Bond viciously and brutally attacks him. I know we've got the staircase scene in 2006, but this is much more, much more brutal and real, and knocks poor Basil to the ground.
I felt like I was watching From Russia with Love, the train fight, to be honest with you.
I know, it
It's the
was
same.
crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
The intensity of the. No, what actually happens is that Bond does attack him and knock him down, but it's very like play pantomime sort of thing. Just no real effort to make it look real. He just kind of throws a few fists and knocks Basil down, and that's it. Very, very silly.
And it's not even like punches, it's like thumps. It's like thumping him.
Yes.
Which I guess in some respects is like, well, he's desperate, like he's really whacking him. But again, it doesn't look very Bondy, where it's just like really, really unceremoniously beating this guy.
Yes, especially because he's massive as well. Like Basil is much taller than him, but Bond just kind of had to like try and knock him down and and hit him, and it looks very off. So we then go to Lashif calling for his goons, and we kind of stay in the other room where Lashif is with the camera, and we see Lashif go towards the door and enter the room, and then I think you hear a gunshot, and at that point I think Lashif then stumbles out, holding his chest, and then we see Basil on the floor just get shot too, like he just gets shot.
Sorry, Basil, but you're still there, so you have to be dealt with.
Yeah, you got to die. And Lashif goes over and sits down in the chair, and then Valerie carries Bond out, who he looks a bit more battered. He can't really walk properly, and sits him in the chair. And Valerie's all like, "You got to kill him, kill Lashif." And Bond is holding a gun. I think Lashif maybe eggs him on a little bit, saying, "Go on, do it," or something like that. And eventually Bond thinks about it, and then he says to Valerie to go and call the police. And the end appears on screen, followed by credits. And that was the end of Casino Royale.
Wait, what?
Oh yeah, we're done.
No.
Yeah.
Wait, seriously?
That's the ending I saw.
Interesting. I had a different ending.
Wow. That would make more sense, because I was very like, okay, I kind of get why you would end it there, because you kind of saying like, okay, Bond has decided not to kill him and to call the police, and the police will sort it out, and that's all details. But it also felt very sudden that it just suddenly snapped to the end. But that's for me where it finished.
Wow. So well, if you want to call it official now, the official version on the Blu-ray ends there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was an ending that was found like separately from the bulk of it, and that, I guess, someone, like the one I watched on YouTube, someone stuck it on there. Okay, do you want me to carry on then?
I guess so. I'm interested.
Okay, so I mean, I can kind of see why they. Well, it's not that they cut it, but I see why they didn't really care about adding this bit on, because it's kind of stupid. Anyway, she goes over to the phone. We know where the phone is. We've seen it before. She has to pass by Lashif on the chair to do it, and as she does that, he grabs her.
Oh.
He grabs her, and he's got one more razor, because he had 3, remember? And he's got his other razor from somewhere, and he's kind of holding it with it to her neck and kind of holding her hostage. And there's a bit between Lashif and Bond, as you know, Lashif has got her and is moving around the room and is like, give me the check or she'll die, or if you shoot me, we'll both die, sort of thing. And he's kind of edging closer and closer back towards the door with his arm around her, a razor still there, and he kind of egging Bond on still, like, shoot me. And instead, what she does is she just kind of makes a break for it at one point because he's not paying attention, the Sheaf. And so, yeah, she kind of like ducks out of his arms, and then Bond shoots him.
Oh.
And she gets up, goes to sit with Bond, they kiss, and then it's the end.
Yeah, I don't know why you would cut that, I suppose.
Yeah, but at least it is a resolution to the Sheaf.
Yeah, I guess it makes more sense to kill him and Bond gets the girl, that sort of thing.
I mean, it all happens very quickly because that literally all happens in the span of about 30 seconds. But yeah, so interesting. Interesting that's not on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, I would have thought it would have been on there, but I guess the version they had just didn't have it, or the quality would have been lower, something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
So I find this whole ending section just a little bit weak as a whole. Like the best part of it is the sheaf, as we've already talked about, but this is like completely changed. Like Bond is the one who frees himself, and then you got Valerie there as well. Like as Bond's being tortured, the torture just doesn't really come across that interesting. And the ending for the sheaf, I guess, even with him being shot, I guess it's fine. But yeah, this was probably one of the weaker parts of the episode for me. I just feel like it falls quite flat, a lot of this. And if it wasn't for the sheaf, this would just be quite terrible and boring.
Yeah, yeah. It's just something that we would often complain about with the main films is just the ending is often over very, very quickly, and kind of almost, as I said before, kind of cartoonishly, especially like some of the things that happen with this bit where after he's got shot, he kind of stumbles, and I love how Bond's like, "Sit down," and he's like, "All right." He's just the way he said, "All right, okay, I'll sit down then," and yeah, the bit that you didn't see with the razor up to her neck, really stupid. Like they have this really, I guess it's meant to be sinister close up of the razor right near her neck, but it's just kind of amateur. It's not great. It's not great. Barry Nelson's not great here either. So it's a shame, but I think there's other parts that make up for it. So it's not a complete waste.
No, I still like the idea of it being in the casino, but they just don't really pull it off. There's just the intensity just is not there.
No.
So that was the climax episode for the adaptation of Casino Royale. What did you think of it, Joe? Overall thoughts?
Well, you know what? I had never watched any of this before watching for this podcast. I'd seen photos of Barry Nelson, and Peter Lorre, but yeah, I've never watched it. And I can safely say that I'm pleased that I watched it for this. I think, although I really don't like the version of Bond in this, it's not Bond. Let's just be honest. It's this weird American agent that everyone calls Jimmy, who just happens to be in the same story as James Bond. It still has. I think I just like the concept of squishing it down, this whole story and this book, into basically 50 minutes of TV, and what they had to keep, what they had to cut, what they had to merge to do that. And I think on the whole, they did that pretty well. I would say if you knew nothing about James Bond, if you hadn't read the book, you still would have got most of that, I think. And having it in that sort of stage scenario, couple of sets, it's all very, very quick. It's almost real time, a lot of it. It's just like a nice little oddity of Bond history, and I think if you are a big Bond fan, it's definitely something to watch. I mean, it's 50 minutes, you may as well. It's not going to take long, and you'll probably get something out of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think there's lots of different ways you can approach this and kind of, I guess, critique it. One is as the first version of James Bond being adapted, it's pretty terrible. Like Barry
Yeah,
Nelson is pretty bad. It skips a ton of details. It changes a lot of things that just makes it a little bit more odd and confusing and just kind of disconnects it from the rest of James Bond. And yeah, I've already said it, but Barry Nelson as James Bond is terrible. So I think as a introduction to Bond on screen, yeah, it's terrible. But as a standalone adaptation of Casino Royale, I agree with you. I think it's actually surprisingly decent. And they actually are surprisingly smart about how they adapt this to fit it into this 50-minute episode. And it feels quite complete. And I think they actually nail quite a lot of the aspects of it. And I actually enjoyed it for the most part. I wouldn't say it's great, but I thought it was overall surprisingly enjoyable. They made, I think, sensible cuts and they stripped it down when they needed to. I didn't necessarily liked all the changes, but I think I could understand all the changes. And I thought it was enjoyable as a whole. The things that let it down for me are Barry Nelson, and I think Valerie is just a nothing character to the point where I would have just liked to see her not be around. Like they took the character of Vesper and changed it where now it's an ex-girlfriend who works for a French secret service. It's just a bit bad. But I think the portrayal of Le Chiffre is very good. I think Leiter is actually surprisingly enjoyable. I think
Mm.
they get a lot of the core beats right. And I also really like a lot of the direct references to the book. They don't necessarily, they're not all faithful, but it's kind of cool to see some of these exact moments that are in the book that you don't see in any other version actually have some sort of adaptation. Even if it's not massively faithful for the book, in some ways it's more faithful for the book. And I think from that aspect, it makes it actually quite worthwhile and, as you said, kind of worth watching if you are a fan of Bond and a fan of the book.
Yeah, I mean, if you're at the stage where we are, and lots of other Bond fans will be, where you've watched everything, you've seen the films, you've seen uh, the documentaries or what have you, and you've seen the weird non-official Bond films, and this is just it's just something. It's something there. It's something. It's got that kind of historic angle to it now, where it's just so different. You know, Never Say Never Again, and even Casino Royale 1967. Yeah, they're different, but they're still relatively modern. Like you can make sense of them. Well, maybe not so much Casino Royale 1967. Very much some nonsensical stuff in there. But with this, like I can't say I watch many TV shows from the 50s anymore. So just from that aspect of it, it was kind of fun just to go back to and see what like a little snapshot into history from then and how they made things.
But that's how this could have come out, right? This we could have been coming away from this being like, oh, it's a 1950s TV show and it shows and it sucks because like, they didn't know what they were doing. So the
Yeah.
fact that it was as successful as it was, not like an incredible version of it, but the fact that it actually kind of worked as this standalone story and showing these characters is pretty impressive for the time. I can't say I've seen enough 50 shows to really compare it to what else was on there, but I was kind of half expecting to just nod off and not really care about any of it because who cares about the 1950s, like this 1950s TV show? And that's something that I think other Bond films are very good at. Like, I don't watch a ton of stuff from the 60s, but I would say I pretty much enjoy all of the Bond films from that era. Wait, when did Diamonds Are
Yeah.
Forever come out? Was that 70s? Or was that
71, I
okay,
think.
cool. Yeah, so I enjoy all the Bond films from the 60s.
Damn you.
Yeah. And normally I wouldn't watch films from that are that old. Maybe that's my problem. Maybe I need to be more open minded. But if you wanted to put on like an episode of a TV show from the 50s, I would be like, that sounds terrible. I do not want to watch a black and white thing like this. So actually to be able to sit down and enjoy it, maybe we're being harsh with this standard, but it's surprisingly it was a lot better than I thought it would be.
Yep, I'm with you there. Um, Pleased we did this. Pleased we did this. Not so much scraping the bottom of the barrel as I thought.
No, I think it deserves to be remembered by Bond fans. As you said, like it's people should watch it. If you have an interest in Bond and you want to see this history, it's not like this terrible thing. And I would watch this over Casino Royale 1967 any day of the week. I thought
Yeah,
this was more interesting as a watch, maybe because it's half the length, but overall, I actually thought it was better. I much preferred it.
that definitely helps being 50 minutes long. The other thing I was going to say that I think is quite interesting, and just a comment when I was looking up this episode on Wikipedia and just reading about it, read a bit about Barry Nelson, who played Jimmy Bond here. Uh, Barry Nelson died in April 2007, so there is a chance that he did see the new Casino Royale.
Oh,
I wondered
okay.
what he would have thought of it all
Yeah.
that time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been cool if he did see it. Well, I guess it depends what else he did, really. But I don't know enough about poor Barry.
No, I mean, I'm looking at anyway. I won't go into his IMDb, but I hope he did, and he could say, you know what, I did that 50 odd years ago.
Yes, like his betrayal was bad, but to be honest, I didn't hate it as much as I thought as an American version of Bond. I guess for some people that's probably enough to never watch this and might be part of the
Yeah,
reason why not. I don't like it, but I wouldn't say the reason I disliked his performance was because he's American. It's because he did a bad job portraying James Bond.
yes, yeah,
And for you, it's because his suit didn't fit, and that's just a
because the
crime.
suit didn't fit. Thank God they got the tailors for the proper films because it really helps.
I think that's where the budget goes for the most part.
Probably that and cigars. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, they pay for it with a watch deal, so that
yeah.
works out. Okay, any last thoughts before we go, Joe?
What on earth are we gonna do now?
I don't know. Is there a Was there an adaptation of Casino Royale between the book and this? Was there a radio show that we can listen to and talk about?
Oh no.
We can
Maybe
keep
though.
going.
Radio plays. I'm gonna do some research.
Yeah. I actually did look that up a little bit, and I'm not too sure about it because I felt like I thought this was the first adaptation of Bond, and I think it is the Climax episode. But I also want to say there was a radio version at some point, but I couldn't find any evidence of a radio version existing before this Climax version. But I always thought like there was, but if there was, I in my very loose research wasn't able to come across it.
Casino Royale comic book.
There we go.
There you go. That's next.
Done. It's going to be our longest episode ever. It's going to be longer than No Time to Die as we read a comic.
And try and explain and visualize every panel.
Yes.
For your listening pleasure.
And we'll do the voices as well.
We'll just act it out.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening. You've been listening to a bonus episode of the Bond Revisited podcast. We will see you next time when we finally get some news about Bond 26.
Please, Barbara, give us something.
Something.
Anything.